Good morning. My name is Tyler McCann, and I'm the Managing Director of the Canadian Agri-Food Policy Institute. Before we begin our webinar today, I want to acknowledge that I am participating in this webinar from Western Quebec, located on the traditional, unceded, unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. As an organization, we recognize there are many steps on the road to reconciliation, and it is a journey we must all take together. I would also like to highlight that French translation is available. You can see in the webinar chat how to enable translated captions for the webinar today. Canadian agriculture and food faces big challenges with the potential for very different solutions that lead to very different outcomes for the sector. Dialogue and debate are essential to getting better policy outcomes. Instead of shying away from thoughtful debate, we think we should embrace it. To advance CAPI's mission of advancing policy solutions, the Ag Policy Exchange webinar series offers a platform for respectful debate and dialogue to explore diverse perspectives on critical policy issues. In this webinar, panelists will come together to offer their viewpoint on a critical challenge before we move into a more in-depth dialogue. This Real Ag and CAPI Policy Exchange asks the question, is the future of Canadian agriculture digital? All of this work is made possible by partners throughout the agri-food sector and across value chains to advance policy solutions. This support is essential in exploring these important issues. Today's webinar was funded by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada under the Sustainable Canadian Agriculture Partnerships Agri-Competitiveness Program, and we're quite pleased to be hosting it in partnership with Real Ag. Digital agriculture holds significant potential to boost the profitability, sustainability, and productivity of Canadian farms. While our country is making progress, there's significant opportunity for Canada to do more to be a world leader in the development and adoption of digital agriculture. Based on CAPI's recent work on digital ag, including a report, this webinar will explore what it takes for Canada to take a leap forward and become more of a leader. We'd like to thank Emily for collaborating with CAPI on the report and TELUS Agriculture for supporting it. The report was also funded in part by Agriculture and Agri-Food Canada under the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnerships Agri-Competitiveness Program. Today is going to start with an opening conversation between Joe Dales and Shaun Haney, and then we'll get into a panel discussion. But first, we'd like to hear from you, the audience. A poll will be shared here on the screen where we want to hear from you. Is Canada well positioned to take advantage of agriculture's digital future? Yes, no, it could be, but we need to pick up the pace are the options that we've given you. So please take a minute to answer the poll and help us hear from you as to how you think we're doing in this country. I'd also like to take a minute while you're doing this to highlight the report that we put out with Emily. It's available in the chat. We've also recently released a number of different reports as building on CAPI's land use and conversion work that you can find on our website as well. And so if we'll just take a minute to get some results from the poll. Thank you all for taking a minute to answer it. And the results are 70%, 69% of respondents are saying it could be, but we need to pick up the pace. And so we will get into that today. And to start us off on that discussion, I'm quite pleased to hand it over to our partner for the webinar today, Shaun Haney, who is going to talk to Joe Dales. And Shaun, I think I'm handing it over to you to introduce Joe.
Hey, great stuff. Really appreciate it, Tyler. And it's great to be doing today's webinar in collaboration with CAPI. So, and what's also exciting is I get to bring in somebody that I know very well. We've done a lot of work over the years together. We've collaborated, we've competed. And, when I think about ag tech in Canada, honestly, I think of Joe Dales. So, Joe, it's great to have you here today.
Thanks, Shaun. And you're my hero, too.
Good stuff. Well, enough of the back padding. Hey, Joe, give us a quick background on yourself and your significance in this sector.
So I'm from a family farm in Ontario. My brother's still a partner in a large cash cropping operation, but I started my career in agribusiness and first part with a lot of the large life science companies. And then 25-ish years ago, thought, I should maybe try being an entrepreneur. And I saw this thing called the internet emerging, and I thought, this has huge utility for farmers because all of a sudden they have access to the markets and the knowledge, the libraries of the world from Outlook, Saskatchewan, or Picture Butte, Alberta. So met some programmers that knew how to build these things called websites, and we started building tools for farmers. Agcareers.com was our first site that my wife and I built, and then eventually it became farms.com. And for 25 years, I've been trying to encourage farmers to use some of these new innovative tools to help them improve their operations. Drive out waste, get new ideas, increase yields, and so I've seen it from not very much to where we are today. And then I loved how the audience said that we need to pick up the pace. I think there's huge opportunities ahead. It's just, it's going to require some smart people and education and trial and error and just innovation.
Yeah. Well, speaking of trial and error, over the course of your career, you've seen a lot of great ideas. Some have succeeded, some have flopped. Timing plays a key role as the entrepreneur and the innovator trying to bring new technologies and items to the marketplace. Now, as you reflect, how would you describe the current state of ag tech in Canada?
I think we're well positioned to take advantage of some of the new tools, be they artificial intelligence. There's sensors on everything, so we're going to see more and more data. So I think we're well positioned. It's just, maybe it's use a baseball analogy because I know you love baseball. We're on second base, but we still have a long way to go to, take advantage of all these opportunities to make our agriculture competitive and globally competitive and globally, relevant and have impact.
Yeah, well, no one likes to be stuck on second base, especially as the inning ends. And we've got a lot of opportunity. I agree with you very much. We've got the right people up at the plate. So what do we do? What do we do really well? Like what is our strength in the ag tech space?
It's a good question. I think Canada is relatively small compared to the US. And I found Canadian farmers, Canadian agribusiness to be very inquisitive. We're quick to research if something's working well in the US or something's working well in Europe. A mutual friend of ours brought in a sprayer from Europe. So we're scavenging the world for great innovations, great tools, things that we think will help us increase yields, drive out waste, lower costs, improve our productivity on the farm. So I think our strength is smart farmers, aggressive agribusiness people, and just that a kind of inquisitive, curious nature. And I don't always see that in the US. They're pretty confident bunch down there. They know they're the leaders, whereas Canadians, we learn, we can learn from others.
Yeah. What would you say are the gaps for us though? Because we saw that poll and it's like, we're in a good spot, but we got to pick up the pace. Is speed one of our drawbacks? We just don't have it.
I don't know if it's speed or conservatism or lack of confidence, or the hate of failure. Innovation and research, you're going to try stuff and it's not going to work, or it's not going to work today, but it might work in 5 years. And so it's a little bit like planting an orchard. The first few years, the trees are going to look crappy, right? You got to baby them, you got to bring them along. And then 7 years later, go, hey, there's an apple there. Wow. It's just not fast, a lot of these innovations. And so we typically, because we're pinched for time, we're pinched for resources, our farmers are already maxed out. Sometimes we'll say, geez, planting a tree for 7 years from now, I think I'll let Shaun do it.
Yeah. And this is an industry-wide issue for innovators. We have one turn a year.
Yep.
right? And so if you developed a technology for an auto plant, you're seeing that auto plant in production every weekday or maybe on a Saturday as they're really really surging to production for demand.
Yeah.
And you can make those incremental changes because you see the output differences. When it comes to farming, it's like, okay, I've got this new technology that helps put the seed in exactly right into the soil, and we're not going to know the result until we get to harvest. And then we have, next year we'll make some incremental changes. Maybe it's really hard to innovate fast because of that one turn.
It's a long, cold winter. Yeah, I agree. And that's part of what we have to overcome when we bring new technologies to agriculture is how do we overcome that once it bad a year.
Now, one of the things I've learned over the course of the last year and a half, spending more time in this space and really trying to understand this and what Tyler's going to dig into with the panel in terms of policies that could be developed. You hear about this valley of death. Like, Canada's creating, we're creating a lot of startups. We have some great incubators or accelerators, however you want to phrase that. But we have this challenge of trying to get people from that stage to something that's really scalable in the Canadian market, but even more importantly, maybe on a more global basis. You've probably been a part of some ventures that have experienced this valley of death, and you've probably seen a lot of people you've mentored as well.
Yeah, so that's what I'm working on right now with RHA Ventures, is helping some of those early stage companies get through that valley of death. And the valley of death is when money's going out, you're doing research, you're developing, but you have no sales, and you can't, you're negative every month, every year. How do we get by that? There's lots of groups trying to help. FCC just announced that they're going to try to invest in venture capital in Canada. A lot of it is human resource development. So, we coach a lot of the founders, keep your powder dry. Don't make sure your cash flows out until you think you can get to market, and get selling and get generating revenue as soon as you possibly can. So there are some things that you can do. And a lot of the good founders don't waste money. Just make sure you're focused on the customer and trying to generate revenue and be sustainable.
Yeah. What do you think is in this whole digital ag space? What is success? Like, if somebody said, "Hey, Joe, we're doing great. I got 25 employees. We got a really good market. We're growing in revenue. We're keeping our costs down. What should I be striving for? What is success?"
Yeah, I think that's it. Kind of is individual. It's probably by the founders and the shareholders of each organization, but I think success is long-term job creation, long-term value to the customers, and hopefully some of our companies can go from an acorn to becoming that great oak. It just takes time, and you're a good example. I remember when you started Real Ag with a website and a smile on your face. So it's the million little things you do that add up, that get customers, that do things that create brand, create value, and success is creating jobs and adding value and having a meaningful life.
Yeah, because so I agree with you. Like, having a company in small town Saskatchewan or rural Ontario, and it's got 10 to 30 people employed, or 50 or more. That's creating value in those rural communities. It's not always the billion. We get distracted. I think a lot of people get distracted by that $1 billion exit, and we refer to the climate. We haven't a lot of $1 billion exits in agriculture. So you're kind of, that's like, hey, I want to be a Major League Baseball player. Yeah, you and everybody else.
Yeah. So I don't know. Success is, everybody has their own objectives and goals, and but I do believe we can grow some great companies here. We're as smart. We usually have access to the U.S. market. Now it's forcing us to be a bit more global in our aspirations, and we've got lots of smart young people that are inventing new things like AI, artificial intelligence, robots, software, sensors, and so I love supporting them.
Okay, but I'm an innovator.
Sure.
I've got a great idea, got a great product. I'm getting Joe Dales to mentor me. I'm maybe working with our HA Ventures. What entices me to do that innovating in Canada versus just going stateside? What keeps those innovations or those head offices in Canada?
Well, and you can operate from here, but still have customers down there. And at a 73-cent dollar, and usually access to the market, it's not a bad strategy, to focus on U.S. farmers and U.S. customers. If they're from Canada and they've started here and they have global success, I think of people like BlackBerry. Canada won, and so I'm not too hung up on where they're located or where the jobs are created. I think we just want to stimulate our entrepreneurial digital ecosystem to do what it can to be a player in this global market. And I know we can compete because I've had success building a company that was international, and I know other people can as well.
Yeah. From our research at Real Agri Studies, we've seen there's three barriers, right? We have upfront cost in terms of adoption at the farm gate. So we got adoption, complexity, that's a key one.
Yeah.
The user experience, and ROI. Is that a pretty inclusive list, or would you, from an adoption standpoint, would you add anything else to it?
No, I think that's a pretty good list, and I think the easier the technology is, the more obvious the return or the time savings or the money savings for the farmer makes sense. I think the other piece is things like crop protection and equipment and seed have distribution channels, and a lot of the little tech companies, be they robots or software, often try to go direct to the farmer, which just takes a lot longer, right? Because you're not leveraging the knowledge and the relationships of the local retailers or dealers. So, but that's kind of comes into the complexity and marketing, and it's to get all that to work. It takes real perseverance and drive and a little bit of luck.
Yeah, there's a question here from Andreas. The once a year limitation applies to crops, but how about innovation in livestock and poultry? Because that is a little bit more of that manufacturing part that is a difference.
Yeah. I think we've seen with the dairy robots, innovation. People like Farm Health Guardian are driving hard into the pork sector and animal health sector. We're working with a company called Vetsen, which is kind of digital animal health for vets. And so, they can work on it 365. It's still a challenge because those guys are busy in their barns, and as skeptical as a crop farmer.
There's a point here by Myrna. This is great participation by the audience. Thank you so much. I've heard from innovators that Canadian money goes to the US for investment because we don't have tax and incentive from the feds or provincial policies. Joe, what's been your experience there?
You know what? I think Canada's smaller, and so there's more money in the U.S. A lot of the venture capital is in the U.S., but Canada does have granting programs in each province that can help get startups kind of going. And then I'm hopeful. I think FCC's done a good job of recognizing there was a gap for venture capital, and so they've stimulated by funding some of the venture capital firms here in Canada and encouraging them to invest in those early stage companies. So it was very bleak 5 years ago. I would say it's okay today, and I think it's improving as organizations like FCC stand up their VC group.
Yeah, a great point on that. And that $2 billion coming into the market is going to, we're going to talk less about, hey, we have a capital problem.
Yeah.
For sure. But one of the problems that I've heard more on the funding side, from some of the the venture capital people is, hey, that person has a great idea and it can succeed, but uh, the owner operator or the innovator doesn't really have the management experience. And so that the training and the skill development, I think, I hope the panel gets into that a little bit in terms of how do we turn these innovators into, make sure they've got those management and CEO skills to push that thing ahead to get through that valley of death.
I think that's the critical piece. The founder's skill set, experience, support systems are really critical. And good founders will find venture capital. So we spend a lot of time trying to coach. We know there's a lot of great organizations out there, accelerators and groups like Connexus in Saskatchewan, and Emily in Manitoba, trying to help those founders get better and improve and be good at growing great companies. But the human capital development is critical, and just throwing money at it, it's one piece of the puzzle, and maybe not the most important piece. The people might be the most important piece.
Yeah. You mentioned earlier some of the attitude on the ground from the farmers. I think the Canadian market's a tough market to sell into, but if you do it right and you prove that ROI, whatever that definition, people can have really high-end success. There's a desire for adoption.
Sometimes it's easier to go down and get a customer in Iowa and then come back to Canada, and because we're from here, right? We're a little hard on our. I encourage our farmers here, invest in a little bit of time and a little bit of resources in the local startups and nurture our own. And so I try to encourage that and use it with my own money. So, we're a tough crowd in Canada, and sometimes it's a little easier to get a customer in California or Iowa or Michigan.
Are there policies or ways that we could de-risk some of the implementation or the adoption, the testing for the farmer or maybe other people that are in this value chain?
Yeah. And I think there's groups trying it. It's just very fragmented. I know OMAF is supporting the Ag Robotics Working Group in Ontario. FCC supporting the innovation farms at Emily in Ontario and at Area XO and Olds College. So, there's pockets of resources and people supporting both the capital formation and the human capital development of the entrepreneurial digital ecosystem. So, everybody's trying, and I think I'm really happy to see CAPI write this report and try to get it up to a federal level where we can have, at least a bit of a game plan that is supportive, because I do think the investment, agriculture is such a big part of our economy. The investment in innovation, whether everything works or not, is irrelevant. It's just, are we advancing our productivity? Are we advancing our innovation? And having some homegrown, technology companies that are going to create jobs and do some neat stuff as well. So we've done it in the past. I'm excited about the future. I think we can do a lot more in the future.
Yeah. There's a saying in the world of marketing, good ideas get budget. And good innovations draw capital domestically out of other industries and capital from outside the country. You got to get that kind of, to use that Jim called that flywheel. You got momentum brings more momentum, right? That
absolutely.
Really,
yeah, absolutely. And I've seen that. Chuck Barisic, farmer in Ontario, started Haggerty Ag Robotics. Now he's a global ag robotics entrepreneur. And so, just by being persistent and getting in early, you can keep learning and developing and hopefully we have a great business there in 5 or 10 years.
Yeah, we got to wrap up here, Joe. But one of the things that the report says is that Canada lags agriculture lags other industries comparatively in this space. Do you agree with that?
I think because farmers are small business, my brother's a good example. They don't have an IT department. They're already maxed out. They're in the country. So it doesn't surprise me that we lag behind, but the opportunity there is we can see what works in consumer world or in other sectors and apply that technology and hopefully improve, our adoption rates, because, we've taken a great opportunity out of the car industry and brought it to agriculture. So I'm not too concerned about that. I do want us to just try to help farmers be more productive, because if we have farmers that are productive and profitable and sustainable, then the industry has a great customer base, and we're helping feed the world. So I'm not too worried about the lag piece. I think it's just, back to the original thing here. We just need to up the pace and get more resources focused on innovation.
Yeah. One of my favorite words. We got to velocity. We got to up the velocity at which we do this. Hey, Tyler, Joe, I think Tyler has a question for you. I'm going to bring Tyler in here, and we'll close up with that.
Well, and it's a question, Joe, that I think builds on that comment that you just made. What's, like, if we were going to do one thing to pick up the pace, Joe, what's that one thing that you think that we should be doing to get our butt in gear faster?
Probably support the entrepreneurial ecosystem. The big companies are going to come no matter what. So John Deere's going to launch See and Spray. They're going to do that, but supporting the 100 or the 1,000 little entrepreneurial founders that we have out there, and maybe we plant 1,000 seeds, and maybe only 100 of them turn into, an apple bearing tree. But stimulating that ecosystem and unleashing the potential of our great young entrepreneurs and supporting them along that journey. I've always found investing in people even if they fail, they're great on the next turn. So I invest in people. I think that's the key element. So investing in people would be my answer on that, even though it's hard to do.
But Tyler, I got an answer for that too. I think it gets to our risk adverseness as a culture. I think we have to have more appreciation for failure.
Yeah.
One of the things that slows us down is trying to create perfection as if no one is going to fail. We have some companies that are, they've been in that same stage forever. They're like professional accelerators, right? We need to have more appreciation for, hey, fail fast.
Great. And that is, I think, a good segue to our panel discussion. So Shaun and Joe, thank you for kicking things off. Thank you, Joe, and Shaun, we'll see you after. I'm going to bring in our first panelist now, Dan Lucier. Dan is a mechanical engineer by training. He thrives on making sense of complex and fast-changing information at the intersection of science, technology, business, and public affairs. He's worked in sectors including aerospace, advanced manufacturing, public policy, government, and most recently agriculture and ag tech, leading Emily's data initiative. Dan, great to have you back on a CAPI webinar, and great to have worked on the report with you. Could you start by sharing some of the reports and its recommendations?
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Tyler. It's great to be here to talk a bit about the work we did together over, I guess, the early part of this year. Joe really touched on a whole bunch of really important pieces already, I think, of both some of the issues facing innovative companies, but equally some of the challenges of getting that technology into the hands of farmers and making it work in farming businesses right across the country. In the case of the report, the way we came to it, and as you know, we had to make some early decisions about this. We really, first of all, wanted to recognize that digital is a big opportunity facing the sector, with all the digitization happening across the whole of the economy, and not to mention the innovations that are being produced by existing agribusiness and machinery companies, but of course startups. But that work was needed to sort of realize that value, right? There's a lot of potential here, but we have to really be focused and as a sector. So that's government, that's industry, that's farmers. Focus on how we turn that potential into real value on the farm. To do that, I think the key lens we took was all about innovation, or all about adoption. not putting aside some of the important issues that are facing companies that are bringing innovations to market, but really focusing in on how do we get that technology into use on farms in a sustained and durable way. Thinking that one, that obviously makes a difference for farmers, but equally two, that creates a market that is more receptive to trying and purchasing, of course, innovative new things that come through that pipeline of innovation. So, for readers, we're not excluding the importance of that upstream work on tech development, but we really took that focus squarely on the adoption piece. And yes, there is that sense that there's a lag, especially relative to other parts of the economy. But I think Joe did a great job of capturing both some of the challenges that are out there and also some of the realities that farmers face in terms of bringing something new into their small businesses, which are most farms. So, we quickly did a bit of a survey, and people who dig into the report will see on challenges that are out there. And of course, looked at some of the things happening in other markets as well, and peer countries globally. But we didn't want to dwell there. Really, the focus was to try to draw this into some recommendations that could be presented to governments, federal and provincial, about what role they could play in accelerating the adoption of digital technology on farm. And that was really timely, or it is really timely, because as you know, and I think as many people who are on the call know, the current agricultural policy framework, the Sustainable Canadian Agricultural Partnership, is going through 2028. But the next, whatever replaces that, is going to be under development now, or starts development now. And so it's actually a really good time to talk about this as a key priority, for what comes next in the policy world of Canadian agriculture. In terms of the recommendations, that's really where we started. We wanted to make the point that the current framework had missed digital innovation as a priority, and then therefore we've missed on an opportunity in this 5 years to really advance in a focused way in terms of adopting technology on farm. And so our fundamental pitch is for the Canadian sector and Canadian governments, federal and provincial, to really put forward digital agriculture as a key national priority. And that would be in the next policy framework for sure, and the programs that arise. But to really see this as a key sprint, right? If we invest heavily and we focus over the next 10 years, we can come out the other side with a sector that is different as a result, further ahead, more innovative, and that is using as much modern tooling as it possibly can to be efficient, environmentally responsible, and of course profitable. Going down the line, and I won't go too much into all the recommendations, but a few of the highlights for me were on getting people coordinated and organized. So we put forward an idea of creating digital hubs across the country that can recognize some of the regionality, but also make those links between different players. That certainly builds on some of our experience at Innovation Farms, which is a testing and validation site located just outside Winnipeg. But it really goes along with doing more of exactly that: testing, validating, demonstrating, and getting farmers more directly engaged in that, right? So that there's a clearer hook for how this works in each region, in each sort of cropping system, livestock and crops alike. And of course, getting that real world experience and making sure that these things really deliver. And the other pieces I'd really highlight is, connectivity certainly repeatedly is an issue. It's a persistent challenge. We need to keep investing there, but we also need to think through innovative ways to get the right connectivity into the field or into the barn, and not just fixate on is it 5G and is it delivered through infrastructural players. So I think there's some creativity that can be drawn from, especially places like Australia. They're doing some very interesting things there. And then maybe last but not least is the development of, we called it a national data strategy, but I think really what it is a proactive call to work on some of those data governance issues that are raised consistently. Things like data ownership, privacy, cybersecurity, interoperability, and using tools like data literacy training, something we're very engaged in here at Emily, but equally the development of standards or perhaps codes and frameworks that can really facilitate communication between the ag tech community and the grower community, so that those issues can be better understood and managed, so that the great tools can be put to work, and at the same time some of those niggling concerns and uncertainties don't overwhelm or sort of be a brake on adoption. So those are some of the highlights, I think, Tyler, but really looking forward to digging through this over the next 45 minutes or so.
Great. And a quick follow-up, Dan, and I'm not sure if you can give me a quick answer on this, but again, the report talks about making digital agriculture a priority, but governments seem reluctant to make things priorities in the ag policy framework. Just your thoughts around kind of what drives that aversion from governments to say, actually, in this 5-year framework, this is what the priorities should going to be.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a good observation. If you look at the framing statements that have led to the last, say, ag policy frameworks, it's a bit of a kitchen sink situation. Like every possible thing that's relevant gets put in there as a priority, and then fewer things are priorities. Now, you could also say the last framework pushed harder on, say, environmental sustainability, and there people who can have different views on how successful that was. My instinct says it's always going to be a challenge. We're a diverse country, lots of different kinds of farms, farmers, and also that regional reality. But it is about the sector and government making some choices and incumbent upon, I think, stakeholders across the system saying, these are the things that really matter over this next push. And not being tempted to put every last pit of possible items of interest into the mixer. That's difficult to do, but I think it can, can be very valuable. And that doesn't mean other things don't get addressed that are important, but, say, for example, innovation as a framing element can lead to things like adoption as a priority, can lead to things like investing in innovators further up the pipeline as a priority. But finding a few of those key drivers, I think, is a way to perhaps proceed over the next couple of years in framing what the next framework is. So tough answer, but like I think it is possible, but it is having to overcome some of the structures that we are inherently sort of dealing with.
Great, thank you. And it's a good segue to our next panelist that we're going to bring in, Glenn Friesen. Glenn works with the Manitoba government. He's their digital agriculture policy lead. Glenn's background is in public sector management, consulting his specialist roles in Manitoba agriculture, has worked in crop program development and management with Cargill, done seed production and private sector farm management. Glenn, I'm curious, again, we just touched on this priority piece, but you recently moved into this digital agriculture role inside the Manitoba Ag Department. Can you speak to some of the thinking that led to the creation of the position and how you see the policy landscape in Manitoba and across Canada changing when it comes to digital agriculture?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, thank you for the invitation. It's not common. Government representatives are in tough discussions like this, public ones, that is. And I just want to align with Dan's comments in that respect, that it's an ecosystem of collaboration. I think that will inform this complex space. And our department is interested in understanding that in that context and our role in that. We've been following the digital ag space for some time. We've supported several initiatives in Manitoba, Innovation Farms, and Emily, as Joe mentioned earlier, is one example. And the Manitoba Beef and Forage initiatives, also, a livestock farm. It's heavy on tech. And we've seen the sector grow really quickly over the past several years, certainly in the advent of ChatGPT and what's behind that. So we're looking to formalize our engagement to understand, this ITER space, and that's where my position comes into play. There's been several reports highlighted by the CAPI being one of them, and others, Simpson Center and a few others at our institute have some highlighting the challenges and opportunities and in this area. And I think one that stands out is data. I think, Dan, you may have referenced this, that it's central to the discussion, and there's been several legislation and policy changes and government department shifts elsewhere. Some of them highlighted in the CAPI report, but EU as an example has the first ever AI Act, and so and their agri-food strategy, it incorporates digital ag and AI and data analytics as key elements. The US is moving ahead on a few pieces. USDA has their AI strategy. It's incorporating data infrastructure in the agriculture side, components and more data analytics. And so we're seeing that moving elsewhere. And then we have a new AI minister in Canada, and some references to a potential shift in data protection laws and priorities around economic development and linked to AI. And our own government here in Manitoba has a new branch, or pardon me, a new department focused on innovation and technology. So I think, our department wants to better understand how these types of developments can inform us and what we do here in the digital ag space. And I know it's not just me. There's a team behind this. It's a huge, expansive area. We have a working group of individuals covering workforce, science, innovation, ROI, as mentioned earlier, between Joe and Shaun, and kind of get into the weeds of policy and programs. And let's not forget processing, because some of the information that's learned and gained at the farm, and there's a focus of that here, absolutely. And I'll share more of that later, but it's sort of a supply chain look, and that's our department has purview over all those pieces. And so we're going to do that and do so through engaging in discussions with our stakeholders. We've just begun, and looking at sort of where or what or how our department may play a strategic role or supportive role in various components. And an example from the legislative changes I gave before, we like a clear understanding of how we approach data governance and privacy. I think that's one that stands out as a pinch point. Thinking earlier between Shaun and Joe mentioned about the cost and complexity. I think data governance and privacy is another piece that is a barrier that can be talked about. And so we'd like to learn how other jurisdictions and provinces and federal governments are dealing with that. And we'll be reaching out. And I'd like to take this time to invite them also to reach out to us, and we're willing to listen and learn and work together on that.
Glenn, I want to pick up, you mentioned artificial intelligence, and I think one of the things, again, as you mentioned, the federal government's made this a real priority. We have a minister of it. I think it's a space where agriculture has the potential to align itself with the federal government and federal priorities. I think we often have wondered where ag fits. This is an area where it has the potential to fit. But I guess my question to you is, what do we know about artificial intelligence in agriculture, and how much of a sense do we have around what it means, what it looks like, and what that connection is to the sector?
Well, that's like an easy question. So I think if I look around the tables that I sit at, I mean, I should note in the past I've worked on, before I was in this role, worked on several research projects between academia and the private sector, and trying to bridge the gap, moving some traditional modeling into the AI space. And what I found quickly is there's very few that understand it, myself included. So I think that's critical to understand. It's new, and it's not something taught in your typical degree or diploma in agriculture or certificate or whatever it may be. So the most of our demographic that works in the ag space hasn't been exposed to it, other than what we use with some of the commercial products, the personal convenience products. And so we don't know what's going on behind it. So what I've seen growing are collaborative research projects with outcomes that are tied to what farmers want and what policy writers are looking for, in partnership with computer science or with other expertise that has that capacity. And so we've seen this merging of Department of Science faculty members with Department of Agriculture and Food Science, and building collaborative projects in that respect, training each other. We've seen agriculture academics go to courses and training under AI to understand the language. The same thing sort of on the agronomist side, on the extension side, people are trying to learn more where they can, but we don't know all of that. And so that's where I think it's through collaboration, and ourselves included. We have a new department that has a focus on technology and AI, and there's conversations happening. It'll have to be a collaborative workflow within our own province to figure this out. And with the advent of a new AI department federally, I would imagine there's conversations between them and Stats Canada and Ag Canada and so on to bring that into scope.
Right. Well, hopefully, Glenn, someone that understands this, is going to be our next panelist and can help fill this in. So I'd like to bring next I'd like to bring in Caleb Niemeyer. Caleb is a precision agriculture specialist at Woodrow Farms, where he leads groundwork, a digital soil mapping solution for precision ag across Ontario. He provides agronomic advice and crop input sales. He's got a Master's of Science and a PhD in plant agriculture from the University of Guelph. So Caleb, we talked about on-farm adoption here, something you do every day with your work with farmers in Southern Ontario. What do you see as the challenges and opportunities of on-farm adoption, and you're also on the development side, and I'd be curious as to kind of how you see that AI piece playing in that we just talked about with Glenn.
Sure. Yeah, no, thanks for having me on the panel too. Yeah, so I mean, first of all, with challenges, I think from my perspective, I think that one of the biggest challenges that we have in digital ag is making sure that our recommendations that we have to farmers are actually rooted in value, right? Because that's at the end of the day, we can, set up the perfect ecosystem and have all of our, structures, sound, which is important. But we also have to make sure that our tech is accurate, right? And so that's, I think, something that the precision ag space has been kind of lacking in, and they've kind of been saying, you know what, I'll make you a variable rate prescription for nitrogen, and don't just trust me that it's correct, and we'll go and spread it, and hopefully you get some money back. But I think so. I think that's kind of the biggest challenge, is making sure that farmers are able to measure that value, and also that value exists, right? Because it's not just enough to say that you have a map. It's important to make sure that map is grounded in reality. And so along with that goes the opportunity of having solutions that do have that validation and have that data to back those services up. I think that is yeah, that's, to me, when I'm out, talking to farmers about digital agriculture, that's the biggest challenge that they bring back to me. And if I'm able to provide them data, say, hey, look, this is an on-farm trial that was done down just, a couple blocks from you, this is some results, and that kind of gets some better feedback, right? Or better yet, if it's on their own farm. So that's why I do a lot of on-farm research to kind of get at that and make sure that what I'm selling to farmers is grounded in reality. And so, yeah, I think that you asked about how the development works. And so, yeah, so I'm in the digital soil mapping space. So I provide, digital soil maps to farmers to, optimize their rates of seed, fertilizer, and chemical. And so part of this, my background is in agronomy. I got my degrees in agricultural science. But I think that having some computer science and some data science knowledge is really important in making this all work. And I think it's really important to have people who, yes, know the agronomy, but also know a little bit about computer science and can make some of these digital tools themselves. Because what I've found is that when you have people who understand both the computer side and the agronomic side, then that's where you can really be competitive, right? So that's where we're kind of on our team. We've brought some computer science people on, so we can talk directly. Say, okay, I just talked with a farmer earlier today, and this was the problem. How can we address the solution? We can innovate quickly then by having those people who are on the team, both, yeah, just having the agronomy people, but also having the computer science all in the same team. So I think that it's really important to have that team, that not everybody can know everything, but it is nice when people can have some overlap in what they know so that they can communicate effectively between the two groups.
I'm not sure if this is an easy question for you to answer, Joe, but is it easier to teach an agriculture person computer science or a computer science person?
I don't know. It depends on the person, right? Yeah, it totally depends. So, I mean, but I think that what's key is that you are able to have, both. Yeah, you have to have both skill sets, I think, in one person to some degree, right? I'm not saying you have to be, I'm never going to be the most efficient Python coder. My Python code is kind of, mediocre at best, but I'm able to have a conversation with someone about that, right? And I think that's what's important. And so I don't know where the overlap is. It kind of depends if you have a techie agronomist, or if you have a computer scientist who's interested in agriculture. I think either can work, but it just depends on the person, I guess.
And you're, again, I think it picks up on that theme earlier between Joe and Shaun around the individuals, the people, the human capital that matters. But I want to go back to the AI piece, and this goes back to maybe my limited understanding of these things. So how much of the behind the scenes of the work that you're doing on soil mapping is artificial intelligence? Is that what underpins it, Caleb?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's, to me, AI is kind of a brand word. And what's important to me is kind of looking at what's going under the hood, right? Like, you can't, like, for me, it's not enough just to say, oh yeah, we're going to AI this. We have to know, okay, well, what algorithm are we using, right? So AI, I've seen people use it for anything from, ChatGPT style, stuff, to like a linear regression, right? And anywhere in between, because statistics, is that AI? So I'm not sure exactly what AI is that's all I'm trying to say there. But yeah, like we do use a lot of machine learning algorithms, right? So we use a lot of we take our sample points, we have our training data, and then we generate predictions based off of that, right? So it's a blend of statistics, data science, and if that's what AI is, then that's definitely what we do, right? But AI just means so many different things to different people, that I think it's important to be specific about what what that actually is.
Okay. And I'm curious, Kel, because we're going to ask you a question before we segue to Jolene, our last panelist. But do you see scale as an issue? I mean, this came up again in the earlier discussions, but is this bigger farms that you're working with, or who's kind of the ideal adopter that
Yeah.
you're dealing with?
I think it really is all over the place, right? Because we've got some large farmers, right? Several thousand acres, and we'll go map those fields, and they've got their own variable rate capable equipment, and that's great. But we also have a lot of smaller farmers, right? And so the thing with smaller farmers is, yes, they don't have their own variable rate capable equipment. But they do have access to, and in a lot of cases, like Woodrill Farms, our own farming operation, has equipment that will go and apply the crop inputs to their field for them anyways, right? So the normal farm practice for them would be to have us hire to go spread their fertilizer, right? And so if we're going on their field anyways with variable rate capable equipment, we might as well just plug in the USB stick or transfer the file or however that works to get that prescription loaded into their field, and then they can have access to the equipment just like a large farmer would, right? So I think that both scales can work, and anywhere in between. It's just kind of unique to each individual farm and how that actually gets implemented. But there's definitely opportunities, and it's not just only applicable to large farms.
Yeah, great. So we're going to build up on that with our last panelist as we bring her in. Thank you, Caleb. We'll bring you back in a minute. Jolene McCackern is the director of the Faculty Strategy and Strategic Projects at Dalhousie University's Faculty of Agriculture. She's worked with Dalhousie for nearly 20 years, but is also the co-owner of Folly River Farms, a dairy farm. She's been doing that for the last 13. Jolene, I want to get at these different hats that you're wearing. You understand how the farm works. You're at the faculty as well. You talked about at an event that Dalhousie hosted that uniqueness, those challenges of Atlantic Canadian agriculture and scale, and the need to think about how we adopt technology to facilitate advantages in those small and large operations. So how do you think we should be thinking about this, and what do we need to do to maximize the potential of digital agriculture for smaller operations?
Thank you, Tyler, and thanks for having me on today. This is a fun conversation. There's no easy answer to your question, so thanks for that. I think what I think about a lot in my work and in my home is how frustrating it can sometimes be to see the opportunities in certain size and certain scale and try to apply that into smaller scale. So small scale isn't just small versus large, like in the previous chat that Caleb was talking about. It's also about diversity. So the thing that we're having happen in Atlantic Canada is because farms are smaller scale, farmers are doing multiple things in order to pull together an entire operation. So it's very common that I have a dairy farm, but I also grow some carrots, and I have some wild blueberries in acres, and some people have Christmas trees, and some people have beef on dairy, and you're seeing a lot of that happen. And that tends to complicate things, in a multitude of ways. First and foremost, we all understand that smaller scale means lack of margin for investment. So let's, put that to the side, because we all understand that when you're smaller, you have less money to invest in some of these, massively costly technology solutions. But the diversification challenge we have is that diversified systems tend to have less tech options. So in addition to we don't have enough money to buy, we may not have enough money. I'm painting with a big brush here. There are a lot of farms in Atlantic Canada that use technology and are at scale to do that. But some have challenges, to invest. But sometimes the options aren't there here because we don't have the size of a wild blueberry industry that is supplying that technology. So wild blueberry is a really good example on the East Coast, because wild blueberries are only found in Atlantic Canada and some into Quebec. And so what we've had to do, wearing my other hat and the Faculty of Agriculture, what Dalhousie did was we developed the technologies, and there was a commercialization initiative that went right from lab into the farmer's hands. And so I think we have to think more about that in terms of adopting or adapting the technology to make it fit with the diversified smaller scale farms that we have. So in that example, our researchers took technology that came out of the US, I believe it was cotton harvesting, and adapted that technology for wild blueberry. They were successful in the harvesters that they built, and then the provincial government supported with a policy funding program for farmers to purchase those harvesters. So the magic in that system was that people all worked together. The industry was at the table and having those discussions. They supported the research, but we also had local manufacturing. And that's a key piece that I think we need to think about here, you know, in the discussions that Joe was having at the beginning around, you know, the valley of death and how we reach more people and more markets in Canada. One of our crucial pieces that we lack is a manufacturing system. So when we come up with a good idea here at the university, for example, and we have a startup who's really looking to test and to do some things, if it's more hardware than software, where do we get those things built in this country? You know, we've offshored a lot of that knowledge and that expertise. And so, you know, those are the things that come to my mind. Smaller markets mean smaller investment in research and development. So one example that comes out of the university again was a technology we developed in potato, and very difficult to sell that innovation to a company or to have investment in commercialization because a lot of the larger life science companies are interested in corn and soy for this particular technology. So finding that investment to get some of these things to market is harder when you have smaller scale diversified systems. And I think the last piece I'll end on before we get to the next questions is one thing that we don't tend to think about when we think about smaller scale is the time it takes to research technology adoption, right? So if you have a team of people working together in a business, it might be one person's job to, you know, they're the chief technical officer and their job is to look at technology that's coming down the pipe. They have time to go on trips to see the technologies, to attend trade shows, to do this work, to do the ROI calculation. But if you're a smaller scale producer with an employee base of 5 or 10, it's really hard to find that time when you're backed up against the wall with all the other challenges, you know, to do some really good work and to take the time to leave the farm and see, you know, some of the successes I've seen in the region are people who have gone away and have seen the technologies in other areas. And if you don't have time or money to travel or to do that, then it makes it more challenging.
And so before we bring everyone else in, I want to stay with you, Jolene, on a question that is coming in from the audience. And just to remind everyone, you can upvote questions that are in, and it helps us to kind of understand what the priorities are. But this, I think, builds on earlier when there was a real focus on row crops and not as much in the livestock space. But the question is about how do you attract kind of people into these more either smaller industries or more diverse industries where there can be a lot of different types of farms and a lot of different types of practices. Do you have seen any kind of success of how you pull entrepreneurs, innovators into that space and what might be working in Atlantic Canada?
I think what we have going for us on the East Coast is a lifestyle sale. You know, we've had quite a surge of people come during COVID. A lot of people looking for rural landscapes, rural living. And so they pair that with the opportunity to run their own business and to do, you know, something in the agriculture sector. And so that's what makes it challenging when, you know, in our pre-webinar little chat that we had when we were talking about strategy and trying to determine a national strategy around success in agriculture and food, and me being up the topic of profit and saying, you know, some of these people aren't chasing profit, they're chasing lifestyle, they're chasing providing good food for their families, you know, and the business becomes the secondary goal. And yes, businesses have to be profitable to be, you know, to survive, but it's about much more than that. And I think, you know, one thing that I always ask people when we debate policy here is, what is the goal? You know, what, as Canadians, do we want to focus on the cheapest food possible? You know, because then there's only so many acres in the country that's going to make that the most efficient. Or are we going to adopt, you know, a policy thought around every acre matters? Because it's about food security and sovereignty and, national defense. And then that changes our thinking, and it starts to make us think around, well, what can we produce in certain areas? And should we say, certain areas should produce this crop because you're the most efficient at it, but this area of less arable land could do this, and I just think we don't have a whole country approach to that, which sometimes is a struggle when you're making plans.
So that is a great question, comment, Jolene, and we could probably spend a lot of the rest of the time talking about it. We'll bring the other, yeah, well, but I think kind of on the same spirit, we'll kick off the group discussion on this, because I think one of the things that's lacking on digital agriculture is this sense as to kind of where we're going and the speed to get there. And Dan alluded to this in the report, but is this a sprint where we need to make this a priority for the next 5 years and kind of pick up that pace in the question, or is this a longer term marathon that we're in? Jolene, why don't we go to you first on that, and then Caleb will get your thoughts on it. But what's the objective? What's the timeline? How should we think about this?
So because my whole life is strategy, and people make fun of me for that around here, but I tend to think that you can't plan unless you have a goal and you're measuring your metrics, right? So that is a hard question to answer, because what do we want? Is our goal to have 80% of farms using technology just for the sake of using technology, or is the goal to up profit on these farms? So then the adoption, actually could be a lot quicker, because there's a lot of things that we can use that we have in our pocket right now that we're not utilizing very well, in terms of systems that already collect data, especially in the dairy industry. Like, we've got Lactanet, which has been collecting production data for over 50 years. And there's still farmers who say, yeah, I get those reports, I don't read them. So there's a lot of work that could happen quickly if we decided that was the goal. So I think it's, this is a political answer. It's a short and a long game, Tyler, because there's some things that we can do quickly that wouldn't take a lot of effort, but there's other things that are going to take a little more time and thought and money to put behind.
Caleb, I'm curious if you want to kind of build on that comment about kind of that short early wins that are out there with farmers, right? You talked about this work that you're doing. How do you see this kind of the short versus the long game, and what the potential is?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's definitely short-term gains to be had in the next, few years for sure, in terms of just adopting the technologies that we have right now. But I think that it's going to be a long-term thing, right? It's not like, back in 2005, we were just like, okay, now we're done developing cell phones, and that's just how it will stay, because we've done that sprint from 2000 till 2005, right? It kept on developing, and it will continue to develop going on in the future, right? And so I think the same thing is true with digital ag, and that will always be something that will be innovating, right? As long as digital technologies keep on, developing, which it looks like they are, right? So yeah, it'll be something that short term for what we have now, but it will always be something that we'll have to be looking at integrating where it makes sense to have technology, right? I like the point of not just adopting technology for the sake of adopting technology, but adopting it where it makes sense, right? And so that's what the long-term strategy, I think, will be from my perspective.
So Dan, I think you're the one that kind of framed this originally as this is a sprint that we need to play catch up on. What do you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's not a sprint at the exclusion of other good things, right? I think that's important. But maybe a few ideas to maybe knit this together is, for me, and I think with the lens we took in the report, was digital ag is a broad category. It's much bigger than precision ag, right? And so that helps to think about what are those other needs, right? Right from the back office, in terms of managing, say, HR or workers in field, say, in horticulture, through to selling grain or anything in between. And I think that opens up a realm of possibilities of how you can, get good tools into the hands of farmers to achieve those macro objectives, like profitable farm businesses. Because certainly one of the things that has been a problem is an overemphasis on the potential value of technology and not focusing on those on-farm outcomes or those higher level, like, societal objectives, like, food security and safe and nutritious food. So definitely agree there that we need to do this for achieving key outcomes. That's fundamental. But I would suggest that if we want to make a difference by the time it's 2030 or 2035, if we don't choose to focus and sprint on something, we will find ourselves peanut buttering across again. And that will just mean that we're talking about all the things and not talking about some of the things where we can put some coordinated effort. So I think that's really the message around sprinting is if we believe that these tools have potential and we think they can help farmers of different types do different kinds of things that make their businesses stronger, let's develop some policies that encourage those tools to get into their hands, to be tested and validated in a way that by 2030 or 2035, we're in a different position and can, again, take stock, make the next choices, but to focus and use this lever to go and achieve some of those other objectives that, you know, that we're trying to pursue. So it is never over. Like, this will not be done in 2030, but, you know, my argument is, or our argument, Tyler, was really, we need to put some oomph behind this over the next few years to make sure that we get some progress and get some traction.
And so, Glenn, how do you think through the short versus the long term on this, and what's the role of government in kind of those two timeframes?
Well, paying attention. Yeah, but so I would say that I'm aligned with the comments here that it's both the long and the short game. I think it's the way we've operated. I mean, I've been within the department for the last roughly 25 years, and I look back at all the policy frameworks, and they all, this is like Dan said before, they all included goals related to environmental sustainability, innovation, science, farm business and risk management, market development, food safety. Those were pretty much, you know, static categories. And more recently, there's components of inclusivity and economic reconciliation with Canada's Indigenous communities, which is great. But over time, each of those 5-year frameworks, we've seen the approach and the tactics differ. And as Dan said, there was maybe more of a focus on environment in the last one. I think there was a heavy one in the early aughts as well. And so I think, to Jolene's point, a large long-term strategy, like, to decide what the goal is, and I think that is at the head of each one of these conversations as they develop. But as you're doing today and have in other areas, I'm talking about and sharing what the sector is looking for specific tactics, each of the frameworks. I think that's an important piece. So both will work hand in glove in that respect. Because I don't really know if there's any of those broad categories I mentioned that no longer applies. They're still all of interest. And in fact, I think digital agriculture fits in each of them and has an outcome or output for each of them. Like Caleb said before, AI or digital ag is such a broad term, but when you boil it down, though, it's really just a process that we're all familiar with, which is collecting data, analyzing it, and acting on that information. Except today we call it big data because we use electronics to collect a lot of it and complex algorithms to analyze it. So it's a different way of doing something we're used to, which is where the training comes in, which we've hit lots of times already, is we don't know how to do it properly, and lots of more trainings needed. And I noticed in the chat, Olds College was noted, and that's an excellent example where you bring agronomics and digital tech together in certification, and more of that is obviously needed, and I know that's happening. But what I was thinking about in terms of what Joe and Shaun talked about earlier, and I had made some notes before as well in the same respect, like when you think about those tactics, like we think about, you know, what are the pinch points? It's the cost to get in the game. It's the complexity of that technology. It's the lack of fit for the farm. To Jolene, to your point, you know, some of the tech, you know, fits some areas and some fits other types of farms. Often left out is maybe the small, diverse farms. And then I'd say our lack of understanding of the value of it. This is a big one, which was mentioned, I believe, in our earlier discussion, or pre-discussion, but the value of data aggregation, what you get when you pull all that together, you know, non-attributed to, but the insights you can gain. And I think we haven't done a very good job of talking about that. Because it's new, and I think there's there's no fault here. It's a really new industry, and very specifically the ROI and the farm. And I remember talking, and Dan, you mentioned this in the pre-discussion as well. When you think about ROI, if you have some pieces on your farm, you can get a sense of what the ROI is of that piece, but no farm is one piece. And so pulling it all together requires data from all components. And if you don't have that, the value of aggregation with neighboring farms or similar farms from other areas, again, non-attributed, but you get insights from those farms, and pulling that together, you can create some powerful information about what an ROI might be in your farm with other farm data. We know that farmers like to learn from farmers. Peer-to-peer networks are expanding and they're very valuable and important. So in the context of sharing this information amongst farmers, if that's maybe where we would see the improvement of understanding of the value of it, what it would mean to them. To your point, Jolene, about dairy farmers not using the data that they get. It's maybe they just don't understand the value of it, and so I think around extension and around opportunities in that area, there's a role to play there. And then I think our collective minimal training experience, as mentioned earlier, in using it, we don't have that. We just don't make time for it. We're busy, and so I think there's efforts in that area. And the last one that I've mentioned is the concern for data ownership and privacy. So these are tactics that I think we would are worth talking about, and how we approach movement and going forward. And yeah, I mean, I'll pause there.
Yeah, and so I want to stick on this theme of call it skills. Like I think this has come up many different ways in the discussion, right? I think that there was Joe and Shaun talked about in the development space, how do we give our entrepreneurs the tools? We've talked about it on the on-farm adoption space, around how to farmers have the skills to understand this. Again, maybe go around the room, and Caleb, I'll start with you on this, because again, you're out kind of talking to farmers about the skills, effectively doing extension work as part of the work that you do. How do you think we need to be closing that skills gap? Is that people like you and those that work for you out talking to farmers one-on-one, showing them this? Is there something else that needs to be done there?
Yeah, I think just having a greater understanding of the tools that are out there would definitely help. Like, especially, so I'm going to answer this question maybe from the crop science end of things, right? Because that's my experience. But just having agronomists who, and not every single agronomist has to be a GIS expert by any means, right? But just having more of them out there in the industry would be a great thing, right? Because then those are the people that farmers are going to be relying on to actually be implementing some of those, tools, right? So I think that, yeah, it's about getting the people who are the advisors to farmers, right, kind of trained up in the knowledge that of some of these new technologies, right? And I think that's what's going to have the biggest impact, rather than training each individual farmer, right? If you're able to reach the certified crop advisors or whoever it is, right, who are the advisor to farmers, I think that's kind of the lowest hanging fruit, and probably going to give us the most bang for our buck.
And I think bang for our buck is something that is a theme that we're going to be talking a lot more about, certainly from the policy and program space going forward. But Dan, maybe do you want to kind of offer your thoughts around this? Again, Emily does this work too.
Yeah. No, I think it's I was glad that Chuck raised that human capital piece. It's so important for like startups and innovators, but equally on farm, right? When we talk about digital tools, it's building a new capability in the people who work on that farm, no matter their role, that marries with some of the old deep skills that farmers have developed over generations, like agronomy and so on. So that's a challenge that the sector is always going to be facing as new things come through. But this is particular here because this is often digital raises a whole bunch of new areas of knowledge. The way I would sort of break it apart, and I think we need to be very focused in both these spaces. One is in post-secondaries. How do we train the next generation to enter ready for these things? And I think there's some really great stuff happening. We, heard about Olds a little bit. I know Lakeland, Assiniboine College in Manitoba is doing some great work as well, and other post-secondaries too. But equally, how do we reach people? And this is maybe a question I'd love to hear others on. How do we reach people who are in the industry? They're in some journey between age 22 or age 19 and age 70 or whatever the case when they decide to hang it up. And they're also looking to learn and continue to develop. And that extension piece, which Emily is certainly keen to work on through data literacy opportunities, but equally on grower engagement out of innovation farms. But that's a really complex environment. This is about going the last mile. It's using existing networks like industry associations. It certainly was part of what we were thinking around creating hubs. Tyler, in the report, is creating spaces to reach different kinds of people who are somewhere in their career, who have, of course, a diversity of needs, but are at the same time managing their family, their business, and any other responsibilities they have. To me, that's a huge challenge, because we cannot just rely on that initial training that people are getting, in early career. That's super important. But this other piece of in-career training and in-career learning that people are going to need to do is a place where we need to probably get very creative.
And how much of that is again, you could go back to the broader federal government agenda, looking at AI and skills development. There's a question in about, has CAPI or others had interactions with our new digital agriculture or digital innovation minister, not agriculture minister? We haven't, and I'm not sure anybody else in the sector has either. And I would maybe posit a guess that I'm not sure many in the sector have a very sophisticated view of what they would talk to the new artificial intelligence minister about yet. I want to go back maybe to you, Jolene, on this, because I think that there's this kind of question. You raised it about outcomes and how we think about these things, but is artificial intelligence an outcome in and of itself that we should be adopting about it, or is this part of a tactic or strategy that you think should be driving to a different outcome at the end of the day in the sector?
I want to answer that, and I want to go back to what Dan was talking about, if I'm allowed to, for a minute.
Yes,
and so, for me, and I have a very high level view of artificial intelligence because I'm not a computer programmer, I'm an economist by trade, and a farmer and a mother and all these things. So AI to me is a tool. It's a tool like my oven, it's a tool like my car, and it's a tool like my computer. And the better I get at using it, the more effective and efficient I'm going to become. So I leave the development of it and where we're going in terms of ethics, because that's a huge concern for me, just looking at it from the outside in, to people who know that space more. But, you know, as somebody who just needs to get on with their day, like, AI is a tool. And so the Minister of Artificial Intelligence, the department, is going to be interesting because that's going to infiltrate into a lot of other spaces and places, right? So it's almost like if there was a Department of Computers back in 1975, and you know, what was their role? And so it'll be interesting to watch that unfold. I think it will help increase the speed of adoption because they will be resourced, and that's one thing that, you know, I when I talk about making change and trying to get things done out here, I look a lot at the mission policy framework that you see come out of the EU, where, you know, they name the mission, they put the right people around the table, everybody is represented, but they resource it. So Jolene's not trying to run a mission while she has a full-time job and a farm and 3 kids. You know, she's taken out of some of her life and she's given focus on this. And I think that's what's needed, and maybe that's what this department will enable us to do, where AAFC just has a lot of things they got to deal with. You know, the list that Glenn gave us around environment and inclusion and regulatory and trade, like, there's a lot of fires that have to constantly be put out. So maybe this focus is going to help us, you know, with that sprint. I just want to go back to the skill development for a second, because it is my world, being at an academic institution, and I've thought about this a lot. Extension is kind of my side interest, and we've done training. I used to work in our extended learning department where we would train on different topics, and always difficult when people aren't interested in the topic themselves. So you can, you know, drag the horse to water, but you can't make them drink, and they'll sit through the class and they'll get the certificate. But if they don't have the thing at home to practice on, or they're not genuinely interested, they forget, right? It's kind of like when I take my women's training for work. Like, I know what I have to do, but I don't remember it when the time comes, right? Because it's not something I deal with every day. In the year 2000 in Nova Scotia, we gutted our extension services, as many provinces did across the country. We still have, you know, somewhat of a framework there. But what came in the vacuum was the supply industry, right? Those who sell products and services, who then are coming with knowledge. And those are the people, like, when you asked the question, Dan, about how do we reach those who are in the industry? Like, at home, if I want to know anything, I talk to the seed salesman or the semen salesman or the guy who's, you know, they know everything because they are on the road talking to all the farmers. They're connected nationally with the head offices. They know what's going on across the country. And part of me often wonders, you know, instead of trying to train farmers, we should be, you know, are they even allowed to apply for government funding for training themselves? Should we be training that industry? Should we be giving, you know, upskilling them so that they can pass on the knowledge along with the service and sales of this technology? Because if you think about it, they don't make money on the training, right? I know some of them are really good to include training and support service, but that's not where they earn revenue. They earn revenue the minute you pay for that thing that you bought from them. So, you know, is it time to open the box of policy and think about maybe that's where we put some support for training? I don't know.
And
Things
Dan,
that
do you
keep me
want
up at night.
Looks like Dan wants to jump in, and then I want to bring Glenn in on this.
Yeah, just 2 quick things, because I think there's some really good points there overall. One is on AI. I'm going to just push it a little bit further. I think AI is much deeper than just a tool, right? It's kind of more akin to electricity, or like the rise of like petroleum-based energy source, which has had a myriad implications, right? It may be, and we will only know in reverse. We can't, it's hard to tell now, but it may be that sort of more general purpose capability that has a whole host of different, outcomes. And that's maybe what makes it more special than some of the other things, more akin to the computer, right? Or computing that, from 50, 60 years ago. So I think that's just amplifying a bit of that point, Jolene, that it's like, it's actually potentially quite an impactful thing that we will, see sort of manifest over a period of years, and really important to follow all the implications. But on the piece around the rest of that ecosystem, super critical, right? There's all these different networks that already exist. I think one challenge, though, is how do you balance people who are selling versus others who are informing with potentially a clearer motivation, a more unbiased perspective. That's not to say everyone who's in that mode is just pushing the sale, but rather there's an inherent challenge there, and I think we have to sort of figure that out and also motivate or engage with some others who may be also trusted advisors and consultants that can be engaged too. So it's a yes and situation there for sure, but we can never ignore those folks who are in the input side of that house. It's a big part of the world.
And Glenn, I'd be interested in your perspective on this, because I think that there is this tension that exists today where there is a yearning to return back to the days when provincial ag departments had people across the province doing extension work that we're not going to return to. There is this new model that's there, but I think that there is also a reluctance to embrace those salespeople that are out across the country that are actually have boots on the ground. But Glenn, when you think about this, and again in the role in government and supporting this extension or skills development piece, Glenn, where do you think that's going to go?
Well, yeah, I think Manitoba uniquely is one province that's held on to its extension team. So we're grateful for that, and they're very active in various spaces. So and I know several are upskilling, learning about on the periphery of where time is possible to learn about AI and about the digital ag applications on the farm, and incorporate that into their extension messages, partnering with companies and service suppliers to do that. Those conversations happen all the time. But I think back to Caleb's comment, is it enough? We don't have as many people in the department as we did 20 years ago. And so I think we're all stretched a little thin. I think the entire sector is a little bit smaller than it used to be 20 years ago. So it's a matter of volume. And to your point, Dan, about the hub and spoke, I'm getting back to training here a little bit, but that hub and spoke system, I think there's value in that, because we need to create somewhat of an immersive environment for those that are already commercial and operating and have families and have other obligations, to elevate the literacy around the data and AI and its capacity and probabilities and possibilities, but how to use it. And so we're probably, I remember when yield monitors came out in the mid 90s, I was, just finishing school, and we thought it was the greatest thing. I worked on farms for several years. We didn't really use them. And 30 years later, they're now, I think finally reaching a point where they are used to their full capacity on some farms, not the majority, which we've talked about, but it's taken a long time. So we're at the beginning stages of a new way, of farming, to learning how to manage crops and livestock. And so building more capacity, more volume of information or opportunities for training and learning this information, I think is what's going to be behind it. In terms of training agronomists, this is not new. I mean, we have train the trainer programs, at least we do here in Manitoba, often in various topics. And so I think it's a great solution, because it brings everyone up. All the tide rises here for everybody. And so that farmers have their advisor they trust has the same training as everybody else does. And so I think that's something worth thinking about, how that might go.
And so we're going to bring Shaun in as we start to wrap things up. But gonna do our last round. We'll do it in the opposite order of how we started. So we'll start with Jolene, and gonna ask you all the same question I asked Joe. 70% of people that answered that poll at the beginning said we need to pick up the pace. So if there's one thing that you think that we should do to pick up the pace, and I say we, it could be government, it could be an academic institution, it could be companies. pick an organization and pick a thing and tell us what it is we need to do to catch up faster. So we'll go with Jolene first.
Okay, so I think my opinions might have changed since I started this session, so that's good. You guys taught me something. Thank you for that. I would have said, you know, the mission idea, like let's pick a group and you know, pick a couple of goals and just start working, whether they're the right goals, whether they're the goals everybody agrees on, I don't care. Just pick a couple and start moving. Nationally, maybe that's going to be too difficult given the politics around that and the differences. Maybe it's one province, or maybe it's a region, or maybe it's a commodity that says we're going all in on this digital ag thing, and we're going to do a 3-year plan, and we need some money behind it to make it happen. I don't know. But again, I'm a strategy freak, so that's where I would start for sure.
Thank you. Caleb, what's one thing that you think that we should be doing to pick up the pace?
Yeah, I think we should be focusing on the impact that small and medium-sized companies can have on the ag tech space, right? Because sometimes, at least when I started, my career into this, I was thinking, oh, we could never compete with Bayer or, Syngenta, with the big people, right? Who have these, in my mind, lots of resources, but I've learned that we can be, right, and with the right team, there are things that we can do that as a small company or medium-sized company that we can really have a large impact with, kind of outsized for the amount of resources that we have, right? So anything that we can do to support those, companies is a great thing, and going along with just one thing that I really want to emphasize was something that Jolene mentioned, right, was with support programs, I think that it's important to bring along the support people as well, right? So that, yeah, maybe it is something that it's something like when people are applying for grant programs, maybe it's something that a small or medium-sized company can apply to as well and administer that program, because there's one thing that farmers hate, it's paperwork, right? And so these kinds of things can help, hopefully help manage those programs a little bit better and help to engage farmers in making some of these changes that they might not otherwise, because paperwork and that administrative burden is a bit of a barrier to them.
Yeah, thank you. Glenn, to you now, what's one thing that you think somebody needs to do?
I think I have a different perspective in some ways. We're doing our engagement right now, and we're learning what people are thinking. I think what's bubbling to the top is interoperability and data governance and sharing. It's a very big one. It opens the door for everybody else in the sector, and I think it optimizes innovation. It creates better products, farm level readiness, and then more adoption. And it allows, a broader, a broader range of folks to get involved in the industry. Lots of mixed fleets, legacy mixed fleets out there that need that and are looking for that. And I think they're left out in the current framework. A few more I do want to add. I think updating the research and extension models is something worth thinking about. It was talked about today a lot. We're seeing academics do it. They're adding field scale equipment to farms to teach the students, but also there's lots of adjacent training sessions that are tied to those academic farms, and so it creates an ecosystem of training. I think that has a feedback loop into building individuals that go back into the pipeline and develop new innovations, new technology, get the farm complexities, and so I think there's a cyclical approach to that that's important. And lastly, I would say building a collaborative ecosystem. I think there's lots of actors, Dan, you mentioned, I believe, or Shaun, in the system that are supporting advancement and innovation. I don't think we really fully understand how big it is, but we don't have full system collaboration is what we hear. And so, lots of strong R&D programs and development strategies, support services, and those working with farmers, but they don't collaborate. And I think the connection is important. It helps us get to the value of death for startups, but it helps adoption and field level readiness for equipment approaches. So I think that would be where I would see it. And that retooling of that extension and research system is something worth looking at. Would fit into that. There's that collaboration, and it brings the private industry back into the conversation. Those that have the resources to train their agronomists and train their service suppliers, and attract VC, attract investments, and support commercialization. There's that energy that's behind it. So that's three things I would offer.
And just a quick observation on your comment about collaboration. For all of the talk about the multitude of organizations that exist in agriculture in Canada, I continue to be a bit surprised that there isn't an organization or association in the digital agriculture space that's bringing people together. That seems to be a missing. Seems like we have lots of organizations in some areas and then no organizations in others. But Dan, one thing from you.
Interesting. A really good point, Tyler, on that organization piece. Australia and New Zealand have done that. They have some national ag tech, digital ag type organizations that try to federate some of that energy into one place. For me, I'd say really basic piece. Farmers and the folks around them, the agronomists, trusted advisors, they are innovative people. They've been innovative for a long time. But in this case, what we need to remember is that piece, that change on farm, getting new things into their hands, getting new practices in place is the last link in the innovation system. It was the delivery mechanism for all the things that precede it. So we need to focus there, and both industry and government, and industry broadly described, right? That's everyone who has a role to play in and around the farm, focusing on how do we support the adoption of the host of tools that are available today. Right? Yes, there'll be new ones that arrive, but how can we help farms increase their performance, increase their efficiency, reduce stress, et cetera, now and into the near future by focusing on strategies, policies, and programs that drive that change on farm, that innovation at the grassroots on farm that can really advance the production that we have from coast to coast. To me, it's simplicity, it's about effectiveness, and it's about keeping it really coordinated and robust so that an average grower who's out there doing what they do can, see the opportunities that are in front of them and look at how they adopt that on that year-to-year basis. Because if we fail to do that, we'll kind of be frittering in the dark when it comes to upstream work. This is really essential to realizing the potential of everything we invest in before that on-farm adoption piece.
Thank you. So Shaun, over to you now for your thought. What's one thing you think that we need to be doing to catch up?
Well, I said earlier the more appreciation for failure to to learn from our mistakes, and there's probably a good scientific phrase for that, but failing fast and learning and making improvements. I think entrepreneurial skill development, which was kind of already mentioned, I think that's a major spot, and also creating that environment for entrepreneurs in Canada to really thrive. Now, that can happen through maybe that's tax structures. There's obviously there's incentives through tax credits. There's also just overall programming to really foster the innovators to want to do their craft here and to build out Canadian really great innovation stories. And one of the other pieces that I learned during those bioenterprise roundtables was the amount of innovators that didn't know how to connect with farmers. Mm-hmm. And so I sort of I talk to farmers every day. So it kind of blew me away. There was actually only one province that didn't say that was a problem. And so obviously that's again, creating that, as you were just talking about, whether it's association, organization, just facilitating that networking and making those connections, I think is really a critical thing from the innovators side of the equation. Great. Okay, well, I got one for you, Tyler.
Sure.
You can't ask all the questions. Through this process of this paper, and maybe even this webinar, what's something that, where's your mind? Is there anything where your mind sort of changed, where you're like, okay, I didn't realize that was such an issue, and we need to address that? And we all come in with our preconceived biases of what's wrong and how we can fix things. Is there something that sticks out to you?
Yeah, I think it came up earlier. I guess I didn't have a full appreciation for the easy, I'm going to call them easy wins that are out there, that if we really put a focus on it, we could move forward. Dan references the sprint, but I really do think that there's something to be said that yes, there's a long-term game around development and adoption, but I am increasingly convinced that if we really did make this a priority in the next 5-year framework, this is not kind of a 10-year or 20-year commitment to make. I think that there's a real potential to say, look, we want to spend the next 5 years across the country. We really want to drive adoption. And if we help make that a focus, if we help shift the culture on it, let's be honest, like part of it's programming, but part of it is we need to remind everybody, to what Jolene said earlier, there's data there available for you. How do we help you take more advantage of it? I think it really is that space around these easy gains that we could make, that other countries around the world have made progress on, that we haven't made that same progress on here in Canada. And so I really do think that there's a big potential for the next policy framework to really hone in on this as a priority above the other priorities that they have. So hopefully on that note, we can wrap up. We're a little bit over time, but I think that reflects what I think is a really important discussion, a really good discussion today. I'd like to thank Joe for coming on earlier, and then to Jolene, Caleb, and Glenn and Dan for joining the panel discussion. We really appreciate the partnership that we've got with RealAgriculture, and Shaun, thank you for joining as well. This will be on our YouTube channel. We encourage you to share it with those that weren't able to take it in today. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.